Hello. I am Batman Man. Having been bitten by a radioactive Batman, I now possess the powers of a normal human being, with the normal human strength and a normal human speed, all the abilities of a normal, non-superpowered human. You may be asking yourself, Batman Man, isn't that the same shirt and mask that you were wearing yesterday in your video? To which I will reply, no one gives Batman crap for wearing the same thing every day. But no, I do it and suddenly it's a problem. That's a bunch of BS. With S.A.C. So let's have ourselves a bedtime story, shall we? Last time we read, William... What did William do? He made his way to the village, found out that it had been burned down, and he was too late, but it turns out the entire place isn't lost. There are still some people alive there. He saw his family alive, huddled around a fire, was able to talk to his mom for a little bit. Didn't get all the answers he wanted, though, because the kobolds noticed he had to back away, and they were attracted to him hiding in the bushes by the glinting light from his beautiful, shiny, pretty sort of McFin that he brought along with him. So William eased away from the bushes, searching for somewhere to hide. He found a tree with several low-hanging branches and considered climbing. The branches weren't so low the kobold could reach them, which would buy him time. Unfortunately, kobolds were shorter than most creatures in the world. They probably had a nasty habit of looking up. He heard leaves rustling behind him, and he decided to chance it. William jumped and grabbed the lowest branch, pulling himself up. Higher and higher he climbed until he found an out-of-the-way nook where his bottomless bag might hang. He looped the straps of the bag around the branch and lowered himself in, peering past the flap lid and the leaves to the ground below. The kobold came into view, holding a sword about the length of William's forearm. It wasn't much, but it was still long enough to skewer him clean through. The kobold crouched to all fours and crept across the leaf-covered forest, sniffing at the air and ground. For all their adorableness, he had forgotten that their little puppy noses could track by smell, and probably did a decent job of it, too. The kobold drew dangerously close to his trail. Acting on instinct, William threw a bit of stone from the bottom of the bag several yards away. It worked for the wolves. He'd hoped their elevated cousins would be likewise deceived. The kobold's head jerked toward the noise of the stone's impact and began to stalk away. Success! The creature nosed around in the leaves and undergrowth, looking for something it wouldn't find. William waited in his perch until he knew the kobold had given up its futile quest and gone back to camp. When he deemed the area safe once more, he climbed out and down, returning to the bushes along the camp's perimeter. He made sure to leave the sword of McFin in the bag, but kept his ever-sharp dagger out, just in case another should come for him. William surveyed the enchantment from his shelter of leaves and branches, hunched down in the dirt. At its closest, the pen lay a couple 100 feet from the trees, all of it open ground. A direct attack would fail for so many reasons, not least of which was his lack of martial prowess. Even under cover of night, too many torches would burn, spreading too much light over the area. He couldn't throw the bottomless bag across that distance, and how could he know that they would figure out what he expected them to do, or even if they got it? His thoughts were rudely interrupted by a blade pressed fast against his neck. A hand gripped his hair, pulling his head back. "Lower your dagger," a rough and husky voice behind him demanded. William brought his hands down at a snail's pace, crossing his stomach to put it in its sheath. The hand in his air jerked hard, making him gasp. Despite the danger behind him, his eyes darted to the kobold patrolling the camp. Any chance at avoiding trouble with whoever had him now had passed, but he wanted to make sure no guards heard their exchange. No sense alerting them and bringing more danger to his doorstep. One problem at a time. "I said lower it, not put it away," the voice rasped. "On the ground." William cautiously placed the dagger in the dirt, not wanting to offend the stranger that held the cold steel at his throat. He made an elaborate show of moving his arms away from the blade, emphasizing his obedience. "Now, hands behind your head." Though he did not recognize the voice, something about it nagged at the back of his mind. Something familiar. He trained his ear on the subtleties of the stranger's voice, the inflections, to pick out what it was that it reminded him of. "That was sloppy," it said. "Could have gotten us all killed." All of us? As in others? The voice wasn't kobold, too low, and it sounded human, though full of grit and gravel. Perhaps not everyone had been captured or killed. Perhaps some sort of secret resistance had formed in the woods around the camp. Us? He asked. Who is us? Not your concern, it said, pressing the blade tighter on his neck. The question is, who are you? The blade, William noticed, lay flat against his throat. His captor had no intention of harming him, just scaring him. And that voice, his captor feigned the gruff rasp, he could tell. He just had to peel the layer away and find out who this familiar stranger was. He knew that he knew the voice from somewhere, knew it by heart, which meant they knew him. The stranger would recognize his name. William Overhill, he said calmly, forcing authority into his voice. Lies, the stranger spat. Whoever it was seemed offended by the idea. William Overhill is gone. Turned coward, ran away instead of running for help. If you intend to deceive me, you might want to pick a name that isn't so shameful. William Overhill is back, he corrected. I ran all the way to the Laughing Raven in the Fourth Realm and recruited Ollivander to our cause. The trip back has been long and dangerous, but I made it. Ollivander, unfortunately, had to return home before finishing the trip. But it's me, here to help in any way I can. Prove it. And then he recognized something about the inflection, the way the stranger held out the word prove. He knew who held the knife to his throat. Held his life in his hands. Very well. The last time you told me to prove something was 2 years ago. We were standing by a bush down by the secret path to my place. I stopped and told you I loved you, said I'd marry you when I became old enough. You told me to prove it, and I kissed you. I still love you, and I think when this is over, I'm going to keep that promise. Prove it, came the voice, no longer gruff and menacing, but soft and sweet and torn between joy and sorrow. William turned slowly and stared into Sarah Miller's brown eyes. He took in the sight of her cheeks, pale and freckled, though a bit dirty. He savored the sight of her brunette curls framing her face like a work of art that it was. Then he took her into his arms and kissed her softly, just enough to prove he hadn't imagined her. I worried I'd never see you again, he said. Worry later, she said. We need to get you back to camp. They turned, and she led him deep into their woods, far away from the kobold hordes and their captives. Are there many of you? William asked after several minutes of silence. A few. Not enough to take on that host. My father tried to slip into town by himself the first night. He grabbed what few supplies he could, but said they almost caught him. He said they burnt down the town to try to starve us out. Got a real bad case of smoke lung for his troubles. Ever since, I've been running raids at night from the north and moving through the treetops so they can't track us back to camp. Mostly we just burn their blacksmith's tent or raid their food supplies to keep us going. Maybe overhear some worthwhile information while we're in there. We can't stop them, but we can slow them down. Better than nothing, William said. Better than waiting for someone to come and save you, she replied. William couldn't tell if he'd meant to criticize him or simply show how resolved they'd been to take action. He'd hoped the latter, but still couldn't help feel a twinge of guilt at her words. And you've been orchestrating these daring midnight raids? He asked. Yes, she said, spinning on her heels to stare him down, and don't pull that nonsense that the others do and tell me that I shouldn't, that it's too dangerous for a woman, because I won't stand for it, not even from you. I wouldn't dream of it, he said, and he admired the fire that burned in her eyes. I was going to say I'm proud of you. They walked the rest of the way without saying a word, much like before, save for one thing. William put away his dagger and held Sarah's hand instead. Base camp was a small clearing with a number of tents strung between the various trees of the forest. Bushes and limbs concealed the clearing from a distance, providing a small degree of safety and seclusion. Perhaps 20 individuals wandered about the area, cooking or gathering firewood or making battle plans in the dirt. At the center stood Anthony Miller, Sarah's father, and Jonathan Butcher, speaking about things that, by all appearances, were very important. Anthony's expression grew furious when he saw Sarah return with William. "What's that traitor doing here?" he snarled, shoving an accusing finger at William's chest. "He's not a traitor," Sarah said. "He did go for help, all the way to Ollivander's." "Ollivander, eh? And how did that work out for you? How'd that work out for you, eh?" He couldn't make it," William said meekly. "Of course he couldn't," Anthony said, full of derision, "assuming you even left the Sixth Realm at all." "I did," William protested. "I've gone through hell and back trying to help this place. I got Ollivander on the road and everything. He only turned back when he got word his home was under siege." "A foolish story," Anthony laughed, slapping Jonathan Butcher on the back. "Do you hear this nonsense, Jonathan?" "I hear it," the butcher said, clearly trying to stay neutral. William always respected that about Jonathan. He never took a resolute stance on something until he knew enough to make an informed decision. I'll be right back. And we're back. Sorry about that. I had to explain how sprinklers work. Still, he wasn't rash and self-assured like Sarah's father. As if anyone would dare attack the laughing raven, Anthony added. They would if Ollivander were halfway across the world, William countered. And I'm sure you and he had all manner of grand adventures, yes? Perhaps you can regale us with tales of your bravery over dinner. As a matter of fact, there were a few tight spots. Like what? The sneer on Anthony Miller's face was large enough to see from the moon. I sank the Scalawag, helped liberate Freeport from the tyranny of pirates and its villainous mayor, and rescued the hero Marcus Bloodstone from a deadly shrine. A shrine. A place of worship. Okay, it was more like a tomb or a dungeon, but technically it was a shrine. Whose? Pardon? William asked, taken aback by the question. If this shrine were so deadly, sure it belonged to someone important. Whose shrine was it? Leave him alone, Sarah said, holding back tears. He just wanted to help us. How? By gallivanting all over creation? By coming back with tales of made-up exploits, hoping to impress us with his lies? He snapped back to William, staring him down like a wild dog. Whose shrine was it? William hesitated. Papa, leave him be. Let him answer, Jonathan said. I have every intention of giving the boy a fair shake, but if he claims to have done all these things, he better have the facts to back it up. William, tell us whose. McFinn, he muttered, kicking his feet nervously at the ground. Who? Anthony jeered. I must have misheard you because it sounded like you said McFinn. I did. William glared back at Anthony Miller, standing taller, holding his chest out. Confidence rippled from him like waves in a pond after a large stone made its impact. Tell me then, mocked the Miller, the apparent chief of this band of rebels, where is your proof? William smiled politely, opened the bottomless bag, reached in far enough to prove it to be magical, and withdrew the sword of McFinn. All movement in the camp stopped as eyes turned to behold its beauty. Even Anthony had nothing to say. William planted the blade firmly in the ground and rested his arm on it, trying to appear as casual as a person wielding a legendary weapon could. Now, he said with the firm confidence of authority, who wants to hear my plan to get rid of these dogs?
Dad?
Yes, Nellie?
Ashton, Tommy, and Nicholas all need sunblock. I do.
I'll be right back. I have kids playing in my backyard without sunblock.
Sunblock.
I'm coming! The sun had almost set by the time Sarah finished digging the trench and filling it with dwarven wine from the bottomless flask. Jonathan readied the torches that he and a few others had distributed evenly along the perimeter of Cobalt Central. Anthony lurked in the bushes, holding the magic mirror. The others scattered themselves about, swordsmen in the bushes, archers in the trees. William, on the other hand, made no effort to hide. He took brazen steps down the road leading into town, making sure the kobolds could see him coming. All weapons showed as he casually strolled into the enemy camp. Thousands of kobolds stopped what they were doing to observe this bold and foolish intruder. When William felt quite sure he had everyone's attention, he spoke, letting his adolescent voice boom as loud as it could. I am here to ask you politely to leave this village. This is my first of 3 requests. The kobolds laughed and readied their weapons, moving to capture the arrogant human. He held his great gleaming blade over his head for all to see. By the power of the sword of McFinn and the prophecy that declared me his chosen heir, I ask you with the full authority of the blade, firm and resolute, that you leave these lands at once. This is my second request. The dogmen began licking their lips, barking and howling with vicious delight as the boy drew nearer. No more than 10 feet from the boy, they outnumbered him beyond the point of numbers mattering, but William held firm. Only great forces of will kept him from shaking in his silent boots. If they saw through his bluff, he would die a quick and painful death, and all the others would follow soon after, all those who trusted in him because he happened to have a shiny sword. My final request comes with a warning, he proclaimed loudly. In the forest, Sarah lit the trench of dwarven wine, sending flames racing around the enemy camp, which ignited hundreds of torches along its path. Swordsmen rattled at bushes, and Anthony tapped the mirror. The cacophonous roar erupted from its polished surface, the sound of every patron at the Laughing Raven shouting at once, a roar which joined with the primal screams of every member of William's ragged band and echoed throughout the countryside. Archers fired volleys of arrows, knocking swords from kobold hands and pinning hats and tunics to the ground. William pointed his sword at one of the closest kobolds, eyeing him with a fire reserved only for suns and hells. My armies wait, ready to strike. This is my third and final request. Leave this land. For a brief moment, William felt certain his plan would fail, that they would see the sweat on his forehead, hear the nervousness in his voice, smell the fear on him, and fall on him, rending his body to pieces. Instead, they dropped their weapons and ran. By the hundreds and thousands, the wood teemed with fleeing kobolds, too terrified to notice the blatant lack of an army. Only 100 or so remained, unfortunately. Unfortunately, they looked fierce and determined and well-armed and trained. 100 of them, and only one William, alone, unprotected, surrounded. Good plan, thought William, as he readied his worthless blade to strike. And that's where we're going to stop for today. This time, not because someone has a sprinkler problem. Until next time, Batman Man says, have good dreams and good night. Bye.